What if the link that could change everything in the McCann case was someone who was always there but everyone pretended not to see? New evidence puts David Payne back at the center of suspicion, and what was forgotten for almost 20 years may now reveal what no one wanted to investigate. Every chain has its strength measured by its weakest link, but sometimes the link that threatens everything isn't the weak one, it's the one nobody wants to see. And in the Madeleine McCann case, that link has a name, and it was always there. David Payne. He's not a background character. He was in the central group. He dined with the McCanns that night. He visited the apartment shortly before the disappearance. He was a doctor. He was close. He was constant. But for some reason, he spent almost 2 decades on the margins of the main narrative, always present and always spared. While the entire world pointed fingers, reviewed alibis, reconstructed timelines, Payne floated in an almost comfortable zone of silence. His name appeared, yes, but never with the weight that proximity would demand, never under the magnifying glass of suspicion, as if for him the rules were different, as if asking too much would be dangerous. And this absence is strange, because there are reports, there are ignored testimonies. There's a Portuguese doctor who says she saw Payne knocking on the McCann's door at the exact moment when everything went up in smoke. There's a couple of English doctors, friends of the family, who delivered a disturbing report to the police. That was never followed up. So why did this name remain untouched? The answer perhaps isn't in what Payne did or didn't do, but in what mentioning his name could destabilize. He wasn't forgotten. He was protected, and all such protection says much more about who protects than about who is protected. What hurts isn't just the absence of answers. It's realizing that perhaps part of the truth was deliberately left aside, as if, to preserve structures, it was necessary to hide certain names, even if it cost the end of a story, the justice of a child, the relief of a family. David Payne represents this pain that nobody wants to name. Because if what was ignored is true, then the omission was a crime. And many knew. This isn't an investigation. It's a refocus. It's looking where nobody wanted to look. Today, the missing piece returns to the table, and perhaps you'll realize that what seemed like forgetfulness was actually choice. If you feel the silence has lasted too long, then stay, because the erased link didn't disappear. It was just waiting for someone to have the courage to name it. You've seen this before, not exactly in this story, but in others. A group of very close people, all with the same rehearsed narrative, each covering the small failures of the other. But there's always someone who's a bit apart, not invisible, but strategically displaced. Someone who participates in everything, is in all the right places at the right times, and yet seems to escape any suspicion, not by merit, but by convenience. David was that link. He wasn't distant. On the contrary, he was too close not to know, too close not to see, too close not to be seen. And yet, when eyes began searching for answers, when questions began to heat up, he was left out, as if suddenly they had pulled the chain and chosen exactly which link to remove. The strange thing is that he didn't disappear. He didn't flee, wasn't exiled. He was there, always there, but as if he had been wrapped in collective silence. Nobody accused him, nobody defended him enthusiastically. They just didn't talk. This, by itself, already screams. Because in cases like this, the real discomfort doesn't always come from what is said, but from what is avoided. And that's where the tension begins. Because in silence, details survive. Small attitudes, averted glances, moments out of time, and questions that were never asked, or that were but just for the record. Have you ever noticed how in certain stories when a name disappears too quickly from the conversation, it's because it was connected to something that couldn't be said out loud? Over time, this silence around him stopped seeming like an oversight. It began to take shape, weight, intention. Because when everything else becomes a target, and one name remains intact, that's not protection. It's strategy. Truth, when too threatening, is usually silenced before being confronted, and David's name became that, a mute threat, a piece that, if it fit, might dismantle the entire puzzle, and nobody wanted to dismantle. Not at that moment. Not with so many cameras pointed, so many interests at stake, so many reputations hanging by a thread. But silence doesn't erase a link. It just pushes it into the shadow. And that's where it becomes more dangerous, Because while all eyes were busy with other distractions, while newspapers ran after easy suspects, he remained there, untouched, indicated perhaps, but never touched. And it's at this point that discomfort grows. When you realize that his absence from headlines, from firm interrogations, from explicit contradictions, wasn't an error, it was choice. A choice made by those who knew that, if this link were pulled, perhaps the chain wouldn't resist. You feel this, don't you? This sensation that there's something unresolved. You don't need new proof. Sometimes, all that's missing is courage to look again at what was already there. And look with eyes that don't look away. Maybe the right question was never asked. Or maybe it was muffled before echoing. Because there are questions that don't interest. And there are names that, if you say too loud, threaten to awaken truths that nobody wants to face. But now that you're here and saw this space in the chain, tell me, was he really absent or was he just erased? It was only when someone decided to return to old papers, to pages nobody read anymore, that the chain began to creak. It wasn't new proof. It wasn't a miracle. It was what was already there, ignored, folded in the corner of a file, like hiding. Something under the carpet, hoping time would erase it. But time doesn't erase. It only makes clearer what was hidden. David Payne's name wasn't absent. It was scattered, small in footnotes, mentioned laterally, in a conversation nobody went deep into, in a timeline that seemed wrong but was accepted, in testimony full of gaps but never contested. And suddenly, when you stitch everything together, what seemed like noise becomes a thread. And this thread leads directly to him. On the night of the disappearance, Payne wasn't an extra. He had roots, words, proximity. He was seen, he was mentioned, but always with a strange kind of caution, as if there were an invisible limit to how much could be questioned. And it's here that the atmosphere weighs, because the greater pain doesn't come from thinking someone might have done something. It comes from realizing that, if they did, maybe they were protected, not by a conspiracy, but by that type of pact we don't sign but understand. A pact of convenience, of reputation, of status. And when you realize this, the indignation that comes isn't just for the child, it's for the courage that was lacking in all the adults around. The turning point doesn't arrive with a scream. It arrives with a name that echoes in silence. David, not said out loud in the right interrogations, not mentioned in reports that should have been central, but present, all the time in the timeline, in the movements, in the exact window when everything happened. Do you feel this? Your heart tightening, not from a new accusation, but from the discomfort of realizing that nobody really wanted to look, because if they looked, there would be no way to avoid it anymore. And this is the hardest part to swallow. It's not that they didn't know, it's that nobody wanted to know. There are things that don't need to be hidden. You just don't say them. You just don't insist. Just a collective silence tight as a knot to transform evidence into noise. And that's what they did with him. They didn't erase, they just silenced. And the question that remains stuck like a shard in the throat. Why? Why was he so close, so visible, kept so far out? Maybe because they knew that if they pulled that thread, the rest of the fabric would come with it. And they wouldn't be able to control the narrative anymore. The pain, the scandal. Maybe that's why David was the erased link, not for lack of clues, but for excess of implication, the weight of silence. Sometimes, what hurts most isn't what was done. It's what was chosen not to be done. It's strange how certain truths only hurt when they fall in silence. For a long time, his name was like a shadow that moved without sound, always present backstage, but never faced head-on. And now, with the pieces on the table, what before seemed scattered begins to form an outline that disturbs. It's not that. Someone forgot to look at David Payne. It's that when they looked, they chose to look away. And that choice says everything. The silence that surrounded his name wasn't empty. It was filled with fear, protection, convenience. It was the type of silence that serves those who have something to lose. And when you understand this, you realize it wasn't just about him. It was about everything that could come to light if the wrong link were pulled. The image of the chain returns with force now. A chain of narratives, of versions, of collective comforts. One of the links was removed early on, not for not fitting, but precisely because, if it remained there, it would pull all the rest with it. That link was Payne. And maybe that's why even today so many people refuse to speak his name with the firmness it demands. Some questions finally fit. Why wasn't he investigated with the same rigor? Strange behaviors generate formal interrogations. Why was his position that night always told with gaps, but treated as reliable? The answer is simple and uncomfortable, because sometimes it's easier to keep a story alive than to dismantle the structure that sustains it. And who profits from this silence? Maybe those who need the truth not to reach the end. Maybe those who fear that if this door needs to be reopened, the names that appear in it will be too important, too influential, too uncomfortable. It's not an isolated case, it's a pattern. It's the same we saw in other scandals. Jimmy Savile, Epstein, so many others. Men who stayed where they were for too long because pointing the finger in the right direction put the system at risk. And when the system is at risk, it acts to protect itself. Dashaus, your role in this truth. This revelation doesn't change what already happened. Madeleine is still missing, but it completely changes how we see everything that's been told so far. Because now the question is no longer who was it. The question is who was afraid to know, and here you come in. Because in the end, we're not just talking about this case. We're talking about every type of truth we've already chosen to ignore so as not to disturb stability. How many times have you seen a strange name repeating and preferred to let it pass? How many times has an attitude bothered you, but you thought it better to say nothing? How many links have you yourself erased so you wouldn't have to deal with what came with them? It's hard to think about this, but necessary, because the silence that protects also silences. And maybe the most frightening thing of all is this, that the piece forgotten in the corner was precisely the one holding the truth, that the absence wasn't absence, it was choice. And now, with everything in sight, what do we do with this? The chain remains there, but now it has an empty space. And each person who heard this story needs to decide, will you continue pretending you didn't see? Or will you recognize that the erased link never stopped being there? Because sometimes, what sustains a lie is precisely what nobody dares to say out loud. Maybe you never said the name, but now that you've heard it, it won't leave your head. And that's already the beginning of a new chapter, not to solve everything, but to stop accepting silence as an answer. And from now on, every time this name returns, even in whispers, you'll know what it carries. You'll know what it means, and you'll understand that that forgotten link might have been the most important piece of all. The call to action. Truth doesn't make noise. It doesn't arrive screaming. Sometimes all it needs is a name whispered at the right moment for everything to begin to crumble. David Payne wasn't a distant extra. He was there at dinner, at the door, in conversations, but somehow never at the center, never really where light could reach him. He circulated like a silent link, too firm to be forgotten, too uncomfortable to be remembered. And now that the name has returned, not as empty suspicion, but as an unresolved question, what do we do with this? Throughout this video, you've accompanied me on an uncomfortable path. And I know it wasn't easy. I felt it too. Every time this name appeared in reports and soon after was cut, muffled, ignored, it gave that feeling that something was being hidden right before our eyes. And the worst part, it seemed arranged. As if without anyone needing to say it out loud, everyone already knew that link shouldn't be touched. But now it's here, visible, exposed, connected, and this changes everything. Because when a piece that was erased begins to reappear, it doesn't come back alone. It brings new questions, it messes up versions that seemed stable, it scares. But it's even more frightening to realize how much we were accomplices to the silence. How many times have you felt something was wrong, but preferred to stay quiet? How many times have you noticed that a story was missing a part, and even so, moved forward, as if that didn't matter? That's what hurts most, because the erased link in Madeleine's story isn't just about him. It's about us, about how we deal with discomfort, about how we prefer to believe what fits in a headline rather than face what really makes sense, about the fear we have of touching what might break everything that seemed safe. But now we can no longer pretend we didn't see. Omission is no longer an excuse. Silence has already screamed too loud. And I'm not saying Payne is guilty. That's not the point. What matters to me, and what I hope mattered to you so far, is the fact that this name was pushed away too carefully, that there were testimonies, witnesses, details, and all of this was kept in the back of a drawer, as if investigating this link was too dangerous. as if truth had a limit and it began with his name. This video isn't an accusation, it's a call. A call for us to look at what was removed from the narrative, at what was methodically silenced, and to understand that the erased link might be precisely what sustained the entire structure of the lie. If we're not capable of facing these blind spots, truth will never arrive complete. And now, you've seen. You can't unsee anymore. So I invite you to go beyond silence, to remember this name, to keep this spark alive, because if it goes out again, it might never return. If this story touched you, if it moved you, if it made you rethink what seemed certain, I want to ask you something. Help keep this chain alive. Super Chat here isn't just a way to support the channel. It's a way to say, I saw, I recognized, I no longer accept this silence. It's a seal, a symbolic gesture. A way to say, I'm here and this story is also mine. There are stories the whole world tries to forget, but if you believe they need to be told, this is the time to show you're really here. And now, I want to know what this awakened in you. What was the point that got to you most? The speech, the name, the absence, the fear? Right, really. It doesn't need to be a long text. It can be a phrase, a line. But let it be yours. Let it come from within. Write in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stayed with me until the end, comment like this. I see what was erased. This phrase is more than a comment. It's a pact between the two of us, between those who no longer accept silence. And if this video found you on the right day, at the right moment, then you already know. Subscribe to the channel. Here we don't stop where the media stops. Here we go as far as it hurts. And if you want to continue this journey with me, the next video will open another part of this chain, an even more uncomfortable part, more forgotten, but which might be the key to understanding the whole, because sometimes the only way to find what's missing is to have the courage to look at what was erased. And you've already started. Now it's up to you. Silence or memory? Turn off or reconnect? This chain is before you. You decide what to do with it now.